You know, it's interesting to look back on how this whole thing began. Due to desperately wanting to rewrite a poor script, having conflicts about which villains to use in the film, and the studio pushing him harder to get it out for a May 2011 release date, Sam Raimi and Sony parted ways. Raimi felt that he could right the wrongs of Spider-Man 3, that he had more to explore with the character of Peter Parker, but didn't want to rush the production of Spider-Man 4, and so henceforth the Tobey Maguire series came to an end. But then Sony had a big problem. If they didn't get a Spider-Man movie out by 2012, then the film rights to the character would have timed out and would have gone back to their original father, Marvel Studios. So just as they realised they needed a new film out quick, they also realised, oh crap, we just pushed Sam Raimi, our genuinely talented filmmaker, who was the main reason the original trilogy was such a rousing success, away. So in an act of panic, a plan was in order to reboot the property with a more modern, darker, grittier depiction, with a retelling of the origin, a cheaper set of actors, and a director a lot less likely to answer back. As a result of this, we wound up with The Amazing Spider-Man, a fairly passionless, pretty dull movie with an unlikable protagonist, a clumsily written origin story, a poorly written villain, bad pacing, and the kind of cynical pandering to its fanbase that just makes my skin crawl. You know, where it decides to distract you over here with all that juicy, superficial comic book to movie accuracy that you fanboys just love, such as web shooters, Spidey joking, and the lizard wearing his lab coat for one scene, from all the glaring obvious problems with the film over here. And now in 2014, we're right back where we started. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 ditches all of that dark and gritty crap, and instead opts for a complete 180-degree tone shift, giving us a light-hearted approach, with a richer colour palette, a much better costume, and a fun, energetic tone, but which now looks exactly like the Sam Raimi trilogy, which Sony so desperately seemed to want to get away from. While this does work in the movie's favour, it all makes us wonder if Sony even knows what they're doing, and ultimately why they bothered rebooting this in the first place if they were just going to keep on making the same kind of movies. The very first thing to notice about The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is how much this tone does work in its favour. Forgetting about the fact that this doesn't pair up well with The Amazing Spider-Man 1 at all, and the fact that this flick is actually really tonally awkward throughout, at times coming off like a Raimi Spidey film, at times a serious teen drama, and at times flat out goofy, Spider-Man as a character simply belongs in this kind of upbeat world. And what's an immediate improvement is that despite its script and the problems beneath its surface, which believe me are numerous, this is instantly a more entertaining and enjoyable viewing experience than its predecessor. It's also nice to know that the kids will be able to enjoy this film a hell of a lot more. Andrew Garfield really is the best thing this franchise has going for it. Despite the character flaws of Peter Parker in these films, as an actor, Garfield is the one thing that stops Peter coming off as an unlikable person here. He looks great in the suit, he delivers the jokey dialogue with ease, though at times he does come off as Deadpool more than anyone else, but that's more a problem with the script, and he looks like he's having an absolute ball in the role, so good for him. But where the film goes downhill is pretty much everything that didn't work about its predecessor. It's difficult to separate the business side of how the movie has been made from the creative side, since the business side is exactly why this one fucks up yet again like the last one. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 comes off as a machine trying to formulate the most successful franchise that it possibly can, opting to favour sequel setups and franchise building to compete with Marvel's cinematic universe over a simple story with compelling characters. And not only does The Amazing Spider-Man 2 feel like an accidental return to form with its huge tone shift, but its biggest problem makes this all feel a little too familiar. This is Spider-Man 3 all over again. Now I want to stress, I'm not talking about the goofy spirit, the embarrassing emo Peter scenes, or the unlikable girlfriend, and I'm also not talking about the small similarities like, yet again, a green goblin who seems to look like a snowboarder, or the city for some strange reason worshipping Spidey as a hero. I'm talking about the fact that the film attempts to shove literally every single plot point it can think of into its runtime, and instead of weaving it all together into one cohesive story, nothing here has time to play out properly, and it all just turns into a jumbled mess. And while I'm on that, don't you have like 3 sequels already greenlit? Why did you feel the need to pack everything into this one film when you already have so much movie space coming up? Jamie Foxx's Electro is a fanboy turned enemy, because, you know, we haven't seen that villainy arc done to death already, who starts out as scientist Max Dillon, who becomes obsessed with Spider-Man once he saves his life, and the film can't quite decide whether this is meant to come off as funny, sad, or creepy. Complete with a gap in between his front teeth, glasses, and greasy hair, it also can't quite seem to make him fit tonally with the rest of the flick. In every single one of his scenes before he becomes Electro, it feels like watching Jim Carrey's Edward Nygma from Batman Forever, in that the scenes are far too goofy, and it's a genuine shame to see Fox lose some of the credibility he got from Django Unchained. Then, in the same way that Harry gets amnesia as an excuse for other villains, plot points and characters to get screen time in Spider-Man 3, Electro gets locked up in a lab after one underwhelming action sequence for a solid third of this movie, so that we can focus on Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn eventually becoming the Green Goblin and teaming up with him at the very end. Wow, I was damn near speechless at that point. Did you guys learn nothing? Luckily for Fox though, the bad pacing and rushed villainy arc means that Electro completely changes from a sympathetic, geeky guy who just wants to be seen, to a badass who wants to kill Spider-Man. Good character development? Not in the slightest, but the actor gets to retain his dignity thanks to the second half, because the character is instantly more intimidating, so at least he doesn't walk away from this looking completely stupid. At the end of the day, Electro and Green Goblin are just marking time for their roles in the Sinister Six movie, and are completely wasted here. And if you expected me to say anything about Rhino, well, despite being plastered all over the promotional material, in the actual movie, he's literally just a cameo at the very end. Fuck you, Sony. You don't advertise the character in all of your trailers and posters and then go and do that. But I guess in saying that, it would imply that this is the first time the promotional advertisements have let these films down. Seriously, watch any one of the trailers and pick a cool quote from any random character that sounds interesting. You'll probably find it's not in the movie, the same as last time. Where the film doesn't completely trip up, though it still does to quite a degree, is the handling of Gwen Stacy and the way it attempts to rectify the fairly controversial decision Peter made in the last film, where after promising her dad to keep her safe and out of his life, he basically just said at the end, "We'll get back together in the sequel." What works here is that Garfield and Stone have terrific chemistry still, and while at times they get so intimate that you almost feel as if you're imposing, they make the relationship believable, even more so than in the last film. Here Peter seems aware of what he did last time, and struggles to both stay with and keep away from Gwen, causing them to play out a complicated relationship throughout the film. I understand that real couples behave like this, and I admire the filmmakers for trying to make this work after how awful it made Peter look in the last one, but in the context of story and character development, it feels like backtracking and not being able to make its mind up on what the arc is actually meant to tell us about the characters here. The reason Peter and Mary Jane having a complicated relationship worked in Raimi's Spider-Man 2 was because he actually lost his powers, stopped being Spider-Man, and felt he could finally have a life with her. But here, Peter remains Spider-Man throughout the entire thing, so he just comes off as immature and indecisive. And if you thought you were going to get out of this without Sony pulling one last move to appease fanboys by recreating a pivotal scene from the comics to get them to claim that this is the best superhero movie ever, then you clearly haven't figured these films out yet. Dane DeHaan makes a great Harry Osborn, successfully balancing the creep and the jealous best friend aspect with the sympathetic side of the character, but he too is rushed throughout and isn't given much to work with. The film makes a lazy decision to cut the terrific father-son dynamic between him and Norman, which is really the character's most defining trait, and just dive straight into him becoming the Green Goblin. There's a complicated plot about him needing Spider-Man's blood, which leads Peter back down the true secrets behind his origin, and while the reveal is a decent explanation as to why the Spider-Venom worked on Peter but can't on anyone else, this is all done just so that they can shoehorn Green Goblin into the third act for that recreation of a pivotal scene from the comics. Never mind giving the character any good reason for putting on that suit or being able to fly on the glider, as long as he's here to reenact that scene, the fans will love it. Again, trying to distract you over here from all its obvious glaring problems over here. Nice try, Sony, but I'm not buying it. Is anyone else offended right now? Because you ought to be. And I understand that what the film is getting at is that the events that transpire here are essentially what completes the "with great power comes great responsibility" arc that Peter needs to go through in order to become the best Spider-Man he can be, despite coming out of nowhere at the very end. But in saying that he learns his lesson through what happens here, robs Uncle Ben's death from its thematic meaning. If all these people have had to die for this guy to get the message, then he missed his chance for change one too many times a long time ago. The movie looks best during Spidey's web-swinging scenes. It's nice seeing him do this in daylight, and it has a really great feel-good opening as we follow Spidey doing some awesome moves in the sky. Unfortunately, the film's action is surprisingly underwhelming, but that probably has something to do with the fact that literally every single action sequence has already been shown in all of the trailers. Where it mainly didn't work for me personally was the amount of CGI used. I understand that the character obviously needs computer graphics to do a lot of his moves, but he comes off as a cartoon defying the laws of gravity in virtually every single action sequence. Spidey works a lot better when it's a mix of practical stunt work with CG effects, like the masterfully directed action in all three of Raimi's films. 10 years later, and we still don't have anything here to even remotely rival the train sequence from Spider-Man 2. So let's get down to it. The main question people want to know is The Amazing Spider-Man 2 better than its predecessor? Most definitely. The film's overall light-hearted, feel-good tone is exactly what this reboot needed. I personally think that the cast is really great, Andrew Garfield is terrific in the lead role, and just like Spider-Man 3, the fact that there's always something going on in this film means that it's hard to get bored by any slow points, and I'm not afraid to admit that being the Spider-Man fan I am, I did enjoy watching it at moments. But there's still so much it gets wrong, with almost every single character being underwritten due to overcrowding the film and not giving it any space to properly execute its interesting ideas, being tonally awkward in many points despite its upbeat overall nature, still shoehorning those elements from the comics hoping it'll distract the shallowest of fans and make them flock to its defense, and overall just coming off as a calculation for success more than anything else. It's also abundantly clear that these guys just can't do villains. 3 tries they've had and they've fucked every one of them up. You're not exactly getting me pumped for the Sinister Six movie here, guys. It's tough to go easy on these films when the incentive behind them is so corporate and cynical. There's a singular focus on getting us to the next cash-grabbing sequel and spin-off over a focus on character development and story. And that, my friends, is the single most defining reason as to why the Amazing Spider-Man series doesn't work, and I can't imagine it ever will do. Either way, we're getting more sequels and spin-offs whether we like it or not, so till next time, I guess. Cheers for watching, guys, and as always, if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel.